Hello, and welcome to today's lesson. We're going to design the contents section of our website. We'll begin by quickly adding a couple of guides. We should also sort our layers into folders. An organized folder system really helps with orientation in the document. Now we're ready to start drawing. We're starting by adding photography. All layers related to this particular part will be placed in the Photo folder. Using the Duplicate Layer function, I'll copy the Photo BG and bottom border layers from the original design and paste them into our document. These two layers create the background, which takes up the whole browser window. This means that they'll stretch out through the whole screen independently of their resolution. I'll duplicate the photography as well as the sample text. These layers already form the actual content. That's the reason that we're limited by the width of 960 pixels, which is marked by the guides we added in the previous lesson. Let's now focus on the shadow dropped by the photography. Notice that the shadow is actually a layer called Photo Shadow. I'll show you how to create such a shadow step by step. You can see that after the cut, a new layer and 3 guides appeared. I'll select the Rectangle tool and set the color to black. From the bottom left corner, I'll fill the space between the newly added guides. Notice that I overlapped the photography by about 30 pixels. Don't worry, in time this overlap won't be visible. Now we'll taper the sides of the rectangle. First, select the Free Transform tool by using the Ctrl-T shortcut. Right-click to display the context menu and select the Perspective option. Now, if you drag the rectangle by any of its edges, you can taper the sides by moving the mouse. Once you're satisfied with the result, hit Enter to confirm the transform. We're going to skip ahead a bit. Notice that all the layers are again sorted into folders. Also, a gray background has appeared under the photography. Let's continue with creating the shadow. The next step is adding a color gradient. Navigate to the Gradient Overlay tab and select Black to White Gradient. Drag the white color stop and move it by 10% to the left. We want to make the gradient gradually fade away on both sides. First, set the Style property to Reflected. Next, set the angle to 0 degrees and adjust the scale to 150%. This will make the gradient smoother. The last thing to do is switch to the Blending Options tab and set the opacity to 80%. This will soften the shadow a little. It's important to move the Photo Shadow layer under the Paris Photo layer. As you can see, the shadow no longer overlaps the photography. The last step is to add a blur effect. It's very simple. First, make sure that the Photo Shadow layer is selected. Next, click the Filter option in the top menu. Select Blur and then Gaussian Blur. Set the radius to 12 pixels and confirm everything. Finally, use the arrow keys to move the layer into the right position. The shadow is now finished. Let's move on. I'll select the bottom gradient layer. This ensures that new layers will display above the background and will be visible. If you now look at the sample design, you can see that there are mostly text and buttons in the rest of the content section. We're already familiar with the tools used for creating these objects. Let me just remind you that the shadow under the buttons has been created in the same way as the shadow under the photography. Moving on, I'll use the Duplicate Layer function to paste the sample sentence, both buttons, and the separator. We also already know how to use the Text tool. Therefore, I'll also paste all 3 articles. After switching back to our document, we can see that all the layers have been placed correctly. Focusing on the articles a bit more, zoom to the design and notice the vertical separators, which fade out gradually from the middle. The first separator is a layer called Text Separator 1. The fade-out effect is caused by a very simple gradient. It's very important that the color on the sides is identical to the background color. In contrast, the color in the middle must be a bit darker. To ensure that the gradient fades out gradually, set the gradient style to Reflected. This is a very simple way to create attractive separators. Let's skip ahead a bit again. Notice the 3 buttons I pasted from the sample design. Let me show you how to create such a button. It's often better to create these smaller objects in a separate document. I'll start with opening a new document of 400 by 400 pixels. We can easily determine the size of a button by a few guides. I'll create a new layer and call it Button 1BG. Next, I'll select the Rectangle tool and fill the space between the guides. Let's add some effects. Why don't we start by creating a gradient? Go to the Blending Options menu and click on Gradient Overlay. The gradient should be from a dark to a very light shade of gray. Next, we'll add a shadow. Go to the left menu and click on the Drop Shadow option. Set the color to a darker gray and the opacity to 75%. Both size and distance properties should be set to 1. We can now see that the result really looks like the sample button. To finish off, just paste a sample text and use the arrow keys to position it properly. By this time, you should be able to create your own buttons. Now we'll finish up. Simply paste the bottom gradient to layer from the sample design. This layer creates a smooth gray gradient. Keep in mind that you must place the layer under all other layers. The content section design is now complete. Thanks for joining me, and I'll look forward to seeing you the next time.